Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Today's episode is going to be a completely different take, because you hear me say at the beginning that I work and teach at IE Business School, and today I'm going to be talking a bit more about my work as a staff member at IE Business School, and it is all about IE Business School's publishing, which is where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Some of you might say that these are slightly gamified as well. This episode, I will be doing an overview, an audio overview of what we are doing in the department. What do these interactive materials look like? What's interesting about them? Because I've gotten quite a few questions of some of you asking exactly what it is that I do, what's my experience, what's my background with all the gamification movement, what it is that I do in my 9 to 5 when I'm not talking through the podcast. So this is exactly to answer some of those questions, to address some of those questions. So today I wanted to start this explanation, this whole episode, with a very quick history of what the department has looked like. As some of you might know, IE Business School is it's now called the IE University. We have been in Madrid. Well, the school has been in Madrid for quite some time, and it's based in Madrid. It's very well known, especially for its online or blended education, where it has most of its accolades. But where do those accolades and all that online learning come from? It all started back in 2001 approximately, where basically nobody in business schools was doing online education because of, there was a bad name for online education in general. The things that were going on were not very interesting, but IE Business School decided to take a leap and innovate and do something completely different from what everybody else was doing. And they started online education back then. At that same moment when online education was starting for the whole business school, they also started a unit, which is what we now know as IE Business School Publishing, that started creating the learning materials in a digital sense. Because imagine if you have a blended education program, you're usually not going to get you're not going to get mostly local people who can come around and you can give them the materials and hand them out. You typically will get people from all around the world, and that's exactly what happened. And the first thing, the typical thing that you think is, if we have all these written materials, why not just turn them into digital materials and send them out instead of, sending them in the regular mail? You just send them through email. So that was typically one of the first things that started happening. And of course, the logical evolution of this would be something like, well, now that we're doing this, we have a digital platform, we're teaching through digital platforms, why not start creating digital materials? And they started getting ideas with things like videos, adding to these written learning materials some additional elements. And of course, that started getting a lot of excitement. And of course, once this was happening and it was being successful, it was going on very, very well, they realized, and that's what I like to call the aha moment of the department. By the way, I was definitely not there. I've been working for a while. It's already 5 years, but I wasn't around. They realized that it was not only about having those materials digitalized. The potential of having things in digital format is that it's not only a one-way communication that you can have. It could be two ways, because once you have something online and it's not written, it can give you feedback, and that's when I think things sort of exploded, and that's when the what you would see now has been, of course, evolving and making many changes, but the general concept of having interactive learning materials, it completely exploded, because they realized that there was a huge potential in doing a lot more, and that's when multimedia things started coming in, interaction, exercises, feedback, and so on. So that's the place where we are now after this very brief summary of the history of the department, and that's the way that they arrived here. And I arrived, as I mentioned a few years ago, the department and the whole concept behind these interactive learning experiences has been going on for almost 20 years. So basically, the IE was very forward thinking in that sense because nobody else was doing it, and still to this date we still have probably the largest interactive learning materials collection for business schools in the world, including every other business school who's creating learning materials as well. The next thing that I wanted to get into is what these materials are. But before saying what these materials are, the something that I like to do very much, because I'm regularly as well doing webinars explaining what these materials are, because we're now not only doing it for our students, for our business school, there's other schools around the world using these materials. So one of my responsibilities is talking to these universities, to these professors, interacting with them, showing them what the potential is to see if they want to use it in their own classes. So the thing is, one of the things that I like to get into, and that it works very well to explain what these materials are, is starting by what they are not. And the first thing that they are not is the typical, and I know we've evolved a lot from that, but still in a lot of people's minds, when you say online learning or e-learning, what you imagine is, having this sort of presentation, and the only interaction that you have is clicking the next button. And that's definitely not what this is all about. This is definitely something completely different. And another thing that I like to explain as well, because there's two sides of the coin, so to speak. Because you have on one side people say, this is not really interactive, this is not really that, and that's definitely what we're not talking about. But then you go to the other extreme, and when a professor sees this and hears technology is involved and there's interaction, some people might think, wow, this is going to be super complicated. I need to be a techie. I need to be, I see all these zeros and ones like in the Matrix. I'm not a programmer. How am I going to use this? And that's the other thing that this is not, because something that the department has been figuring out very well is how to provide a technology. It's a technological solution for sure, but it's a technology that is not placing the burden on the user. It's instead placing the burden on the creators and the designers, using user experience, user interaction, and using all these techniques to simply give something to professors, trainers, L&D professionals, so learning and development professionals. The idea is that the person who's going to use this, because I do myself in my own teaching, the idea is that you receive these materials and all you have to do is give them to your students and understand the pedagogical concepts behind it, not the technology. And that's something that I enjoy a lot. So what do I mean when I say that at IE Business School Publishing we use interactive learning materials is, and I will be posting also a video on the show notes. This is episode 76. So if you go to professorgame.com/076, you'll find not only the show notes, but the video that I'm mentioning right now, because it's slightly difficult, so to speak, to explain this on the audio format. But there's a few things that we will be getting into. So when I say interactive learning materials, and by that sometimes this implies a lot of use of gamification, these are materials that are not only delivering content to our learners, to our students in general, and to the students who are using it from other institutions and companies. These are mainly, and the main idea behind all this, and this has a lot of implications, is that the material is not something just static. They're delivering something. It actually changes, and it has interaction and provides feedback. You are not just receiving this content. You're testing. It could be your knowledge, your understanding. You could be interacting with it to create new stories. You could be creating new branches in the story that was created for this, depending on the material, because these are very, very varied. As I said, it's for the business school, so you will find things like marketing. You will find things like finance, which are very, very different. You will find things like operations, like quantitative methods, like human resources. So they are very, very varied in our collection, at least. And what it means for it to be an interactive material in general, as I said, is that it's not just about delivering, but it's also about delivering and getting some feedback from the user. So it goes back and forth. You'll be able to see some examples in the video. The video also has a professor talking about what his or her experience. Well, this one is a male professor. The one is talking about his experience. Then you'll see the experience from the learner's perspective. You can meet some of the team. And a disclaimer, by the way, if you're watching the video, remember that it is an interactive video. So you can decide what questions you want to ask from the ones that are available. Who do you want to ask? So be aware of that so you can be clicking on the buttons that are available on this video. So that's in general what I would mean by interactive learning materials. If you get access to our collection, you will be able to get inspection copies so that you see them in detail. I'll be talking about this towards the end, and you'll see exactly what I mean when I say it's very, very different, because it's not the same to talk about marketing in IKEA, for example, than to be talking about the FAMOSA restructuring, financial restructuring, for example. It's a completely different experience, not only from the side of the topic, it's also a completely different experience from the side of the user experience, design-wise, color-wise, like everything tends to be quite different between these materials, because of course you have to think that this was originally designed and it's already being used for other purposes as well. But initially this was meant to be the learning materials, and it's still being used as the learning materials for mainly our MBA and related courses. So imagine that you spend a year and a half seeing almost exactly the same thing. You get really bored, and the engagement is certainly going to be going down. So that's one of the reasons why these materials are all custom made. Each one of them is very, very different between them, and you'll find in our collection we have uploaded into the public collection that we have over 150 different materials. So you'll see there's a lot of variety right there. So you might be asking yourself, this might be something that you've heard before, and you might be asking, what's different from the usual? And I'm sure that there's many things that you could find that are very similar to what we are doing, but in general, I would say it's very different because it's custom made for not only each of the materials, but it's custom made with learning experience in mind. But not only learning experience, all the learning objectives. It's very, very detailed. The creation of these materials, it involves a lot of people within our department. It has from instructional designers or learning experience designers. It has a team that is composed of people with UX background, UI background, so user experience, user interface, design, developers, there's front-end and back-end developers, there's an audio-visual team, there's each and every one of these materials is created with an academic author, so that all of the content there is verified and it's completely transparent, where the theories are coming from and what is it that is being explained. And it's created especially, at least initially, it was created especially for business schools. So the idea is that this is created for business situations, and there's what I would say is very unique about the work that we do, and it's something that I enjoy very much, is that you can't basically find a collection as large, as deep, and that has as much experience into all the things that is being created. And you can see that in the result, in the end result. So you can see things, I don't know if you're familiar with the case study methodology. The case study methodology said in very few words. The idea is that you get presented with a situation or a case. The professor is prepared for understanding what the whole situation is about. There's a whole methodology behind it, and it's not just about reading what happened there. The idea is that this is used to create an in-class discussion, because students will have a well-crafted case, will be very open, so that students can have different viewpoints that are not necessarily right or wrong. The idea is that these are viewpoints that can be discussed, that can be, if you could build a whole theory behind it, you could analyze it in different ways. So we have materials in that sense that the typical ones were or the traditional ones were just written cases. We have these materials as well in an interactive multimedia format. So you can see it has things like videos, it has questions with feedback, it has decision trees, it has many different things that give you all that sense of engagement. And that's one of the things that I like to highlight. It's not the same to give the students, and this is something that if you're teaching, and especially in business schools, and you give them, information to read, and you give them the cases to read beforehand, and many times it's hard to get the engagement from students. And this is something I'm sure is not just of business schools, and we've seen it in many other places as well. that you start losing part of the engagement of your learners. And one of the things that is very, very useful about these kinds of materials is that it brings them back into the engagement route. And perhaps you won't have an interactive material for every single lesson or session that you're providing to your learners, but it changes up things a bit. So again, that's something that is very, very different and unique. And coming back to the types of materials that I was mentioning a few moments ago, the idea is that there's these case study methodology materials. There's also others that are sort of self-study, which we call technical notes or tutorials. And then we have also what we would call simulations, games, and that kind of materials, which, again, something else that is kind of unusual in a sense, in a good way, from the work that we do, is that these materials are created for very specific purposes and reasons. This you won't find. I think I can say this completely. Like, you won't find a material that is super generic. Like, oh, this is a material for leadership, and you have all of the range of topics of leadership in a single material. Now, here what we do, for example, there's a material on leadership that is focused on how leadership is perceived in different parts of the world. So you can see there that the idea is that these materials are very specific. They're focused on one, maybe 2 or 3 sessions. So a session is typically 80 minutes. So the idea is that you have a interactive material, maybe 2, because one is a case and the other one is a tutorial, which has a theory. You can have 1, maybe 2 for a single session, and that's it. For the next session, you would be using something different, which could be, again, another interactive material, or you could be using a simulation, or you could be teaching, in the traditional sense of doing something that is more like a masterclass. It depends on what is your style, what it is that you're teaching, but the idea is that these materials are created for very, very specific situations, for very, very specific learning, experiences. And that's something that I would say is different. These typically, the preparation that is required from a learner in that sense is something that is no longer usually than, maybe the longest one should be around 90 minutes with 2 or 3 outliers that are longer. If this is something that has piqued your curiosity or your interest with the work that we're doing at IE Business School Publishing, I would invite you as well to check out what we're doing, because I'm regularly or semi-regularly conducting webinars where I'm explaining all of this. And again, it's in a different format. It's not just audio. The idea is that people connect. They will be able to see a bit of me, especially it'll be focused on my screen where I'm showing some of the interactive materials. You'll be able to see lots of things, and I'm creating a special link for the listeners of Professor Game, which is going to professorgame.com/IE webinar. So IE, the 2 letters I and E, and then webinar, and as in a single word. And you'll find, you'll probably find there either, the latest webinar that we're conducting in English or in Spanish, or probably something that you might be interested in that will be related to this episode. And if you're a professor, a teacher, or an L&D professional, you can also register. You can go to iepublishing.ie.edu and you'll be able to register, because as I mentioned at some point during this episode, this is something that if you're registered, not everybody has access. If you're not one of these profiles, usually our team doesn't allow access, because the idea is that this collection is there available for people who are going to use it to create their own learning experiences. So if you are, for example, in a completely different area, this is not something for marketing, for example. If you're going to teach marketing, yes, it is something that is dedicated to that. But if you're a marketing professional and you're not teaching, you're not being part of that kind of group, it's not necessarily something that will be of your interest. You can get somebody who is, for example, it could be one of our professors, a professor from another business school, or an L&D professional who comes in and helps you, increase your knowledge in this or that topic. And that's the people who it's focused for. So if you go there, you can go to iepublishing.ie.edu. You can go to the top right, click on register, and fill in your information, and you'll probably get a registration from our team. This is absolutely no cost. The idea is that you can go there and inspect these materials, see what they are about. If they're of your interest and you want to use them at your university, of course, there will be a way that you can talk to our team, and you will be able to do that. So Again, if you're part of that profile and you're interested in what I've been talking about, you can go there, you can log in, you can register first and then log in and check out everything that we have available. If you do register, you'll be getting also like communication from the latest and greatest that has been using in our catalog, anything that we've been creating new. We recently developed a virtual reality material for marketing. There's another one coming up for operations and supply chain and the supply chain. There's many interesting things that are going on. We're regularly updating and creating new materials for learning. So if this is something that interests you, please go there. As I mentioned before, if you want to know a little bit more about what we're doing, about the webinars that I mentioned before, you can go to professorgame.com/IE-webinar and you will get some relevant information for that. In fact, if you're listening to this early in the week that the episode is launched, you'll probably have access to the webinar that we're conducting during that week. If I'm not mistaken, it should be around the 10th of April, if my memory is not failing me. But that's as far as I can remember, the next webinar that we'll be conducting. And there will probably be future ones as well for anybody who's interested in doing this. So thanks again for those of you who have been asking. I hope to have not only piqued your curiosity, but taken it a bit further so you understand a bit of the work that we are doing at IE Business School Publishing. This is something that I'm dedicated to most of my days, and this is a part of where my experience in gamification comes from. Again, if you have, as usual, any questions, you can just let me know. I invite you to subscribe to our email list. You can go to professorgame.com/subscribe. You can see in our email list that you'll be getting regular emails from me, and there you can of course ask me any questions. If you have questions for future guests, you'll also find it there in the webpage. You can go to professorgame.com/questions, ask us questions. And again, if you have any recommendations, anything else, just let us know. We are on most social media. But for now, it is time to say that it's, as usual, game over.